There's a concern with global warming, concern with our water, our air, our soil. All these things are affected by how we live on the land. The resources that we use, whether it's for cooking, whether it's for running our house, our office, running our cars, all of these things deal with energy sources. Financial freedom, paying off credit cards, becoming mortgage free. This is another way of getting off the grid, right? You're unplugging from the man, right? We all pay bills. We probably will for the rest of our life. The structures that we have in society are set up to keep us tied into the system, so to speak. And the system has a purpose, and it's worked fairly well for our country. But there are some things that have not been that great. Connecting to our environment, gardening, farming, becoming a Jack and Jill of all trades. How many of you have gardens? Just out of curiosity. Good. How many of you grew up having gardens or farming at all? Right, more of you. So what happens is, back in the day, of course, we were naturally more self-sufficient. And as society advanced, as technology advanced, we were able to kind of come together and become a little more connected to each other. Preparation for financial and social collapse. Anybody concerned about that? A couple of you, yeah. That's a very real thing. I mean, 2 months ago we thought there was going to be a nuclear war, right? I did. It's scary. And so it makes sense to try to become a little more self-sufficient. And all of this is tied into that getting off the grid, or at least maybe understanding what it means to be connected to the grid. And then the last one might be producer instead of consumer. Instead of us buying, we start generating, we start creating, we start doing stuff on our own, whether it's making our own clothes, making our own power, and so on. One of the beauties of living off-grid, and this is where I'm segueing into, is that moving towards the technological advancements that have taken place, and the biggest one right now is solar energy. So this talk is going to move us towards the idea of creating our own electricity, because that is physically unplugging from the grid, but it also has lots of other implications in terms of how we run our business, how we pump our water, how we do our laundry, all of these energy sources. So we are all off the grid a little bit. Recycling and energy conservation. Butte's one of the rare towns where we're having a really hard time getting the recycling program going. It drives me nuts personally. You go to bigger cities and that infrastructure is very well set up. So what do? I still recycle. I look for places to make it work. And in some ways, I'm off the grid. I'm like, okay, here's the norm, but this is important to me. And so I'm going to keep making it happen. And that's just myself. And I know we all do that in small ways. Shopping in used clothing stores. Going to Goodwill. Again, where it's kind of stepping out of the norm, and in the process, a lot of times saving money. Driving slower than 80 miles an hour to save gas. I've been accused of that. And I don't have a problem with driving a little bit slower, because it saves me money. It creates less pollution. We do know that. So these are just little things that step out of. Some people might say you get a chance to stick it to the man, right? The man is always like trying to take stuff from you, take your money, take your land. Okay, this is a way where we have a little bit more control. I mentioned paying off credit cards, becoming mortgage free. Reaching out to neighbors and interacting with communities. Again, when back in the day we were connected a little bit more to our society and our neighbors, and a lot of us in town, we're not even sure who our neighbors are these days. And so part of off-grid is there's a shared mindset where we feel at least camaraderie with those who have similar values and who are thinking along those same lines. And being off-grid is definitely rebellious in nature. Who in here has a little bit of rebelliousness in nature in them? And the rest of you are just fine. And that's okay. Yeah, how many of you won't admit it? So way back in the day, there was no grid, right? Nothing. Native Americans, indigenous people in this country were self-sufficient. They didn't need electricity. They didn't have washing machines or computers or washer and dryers. They lived with the land in connection to their surroundings. When the pioneers came over into the U.S., started establishing themselves, they were also off-grid, right? Cities were formed, but there still wasn't a way to get electricity. This was before the Industrial Revolution. Fossil fuel usage was just kicking in. Oil was just starting to be a commodity at the turn of last century. Back 30 years ago, my partner and I, Linda, thought, you know what, we want to live a little closer to the land. Try to live in a more sustainable way, where we're interacting with our environment, using the natural materials that are on the land, whether it be earth, rock, soil, wind. Seeing how we could create an environment. Linda is here somewhere. Raise your hand back there, Linda. Yeah. Linda, my partner back there. We started this when we were kids, and when I look back on it now, I'm thinking, man, we were weird as little kids. And so one of the first things we did is we started with our little off-grid shelter, which was a little used trailer, a 1963 Aristocrat. And we bought it, I retrofitted it with solar panels, tried to insulate it as best as I could. Back then, we used to steady have at least a week of 40 below zero. So I won't even go into the stories of being in that trailer at 40 below zero. But you can have an idea. And we were just started. We weren't rich. Linda was working as full-time as a nurse. My background was in music and philosophy. And so, however, I was raised around 3 generations of building contractors. So, I was always around construction, electrical, plumbing, and all that stuff. However, I didn't know anything about the alternative stuff, like green construction or energy conservation, or solar or wind or anything like that. I didn't know anything. And so, but I did have some building skills, and that helped us kind of get established from ground up. Right now, just briefly, as I said, Sage Mountain Center is just outside of town. We've got 3 facilities out there. We have what we call our main house is at the top. We do workshops and seminars and lots of tours. We work with a lot of universities and schools around the state. People come out all the time. We have some amazing gardens which have been created, high altitude organic gardening. We're growing things up there that everybody told us when we moved here that you cannot grow that in this area. And it's just true. Growing is a challenge, but the key is finding what works. And it just turns out that there's a lot of stuff that really works in this area. As I mentioned, we have a very successful bed and breakfast going, Airbnb. I don't know if you've heard of, any of you have heard of Airbnbs, but we have people coming from all over the world staying with us. As a destination location, they come there because they have a chance to see what it's like to live off-grid. Most people, when they come up to our place, in their mind, they're thinking the little hut on the prairie, right? Maybe dirt floors, and a fire to cook your food on. But no, we've got a very nice blend of what I like to call high-tech and low-tech. So we've integrated the natural materials, but then we've also brought in very high-tech components to run the facility. So moving on, off-grid. If we look at most of our life, ours included up at Sage Mountain Center, we are a fossil fuel-based society. There's no way around that. We've needed oil, we've needed coal, taking us up to this point. And that has helped establish everything around us. And I mean everything. Does anybody know where plastic comes from?
Mm-hmm.
Oil, petroleum, correct. This table is oil. These curtains, oil. The blend in my shirt, oil.
Shame.
Stuff in my hair, oil. So we're an oil-based society, but what's fascinating is things are changing so fast right now. We know there's negative consequences that come from fossil fuel usage. We're seeing it every single day. I know we've been seeing it over the last 30 years in terms of the weather, no doubt about it. So the beauty is technology has brought us to a place now where there are alternatives. And these are affordable, realistic, functional alternatives. When somebody wanted to go off-grid, say, 30, 40, 50 years ago, you really had to just have a generator to generate your electricity. And some of you, I'm just kind of curious, did anybody grow up with generators at all? Maybe on a ranch or farm or something? Yeah, a few, yeah. This was the way that you could have electricity back then. There were some primitive batteries available back then. There were some early wind generators. But solar definitely wasn't an option. And about 1950, some scientists with Bell Laboratory invented the first solar electric panels. And they were way too expensive. They powered most of the satellites, and they still do, most of the satellites orbiting the planet. But as the price went down and as they got more cheap, all of a sudden we could actually afford them on Earth. And that has changed everything across our planet right now. I've been working in this field for at least 20 years as far as photovoltaics, solar electricity. And I'm extremely optimistic because back in the day, we were the industry and the whole solar movement was all based on the price of oil, right? As oil prices went up, interest in solar electricity went up. As oil prices went down, interest in solar electricity went down. Now it's decoupled from that whole mechanism, and it doesn't matter what oil's doing. The industry and the movement of solar energy is blasting forward, and it won't be stopped. And it's a very exciting time to see that finally come to fruition. A couple points before we go deeper into solar electricity. I love this map. This is put out by the Department of Energy. The government monitors all solar energy for decades as far as what's hitting the Earth. And if you look at the amount of solar energy in the United States, it's phenomenal. Remember, when we talk about solar energy, we're talking about a power source, a fuel source. So if you look at down here at the bottom, this little pointer is hard to see, but these are the lower light levels of 1,000 kilowatt hours per square meter per year, and then these are the highest at the far end of this little chart. So the United States is primarily a prime area. This in the corner here is Germany. And Germany about 10 years ago said, you know what, we're tired of nuclear energy, we're tired of fossil fuel, we're going to bring our country, our whole country, towards renewable energy. And they created programs and incentives, and they basically made the industry take place, made the clean energy take place worldwide by initiating those incentives. And so what the fascinating part here is if you look at their light levels in Germany, they are compared to Seattle area and Alaska. So my point is, if they can transform a whole energy model in a country with horrible light levels, we have amazing potential here in the United States. And just on the side note, Montana has the same solar energy, what we call radiation or insolation, as Florida.
Wow.
So we have a lot of light available here in Montana. Yeah.
Chris, what's the date of that map?
This map is, I can't quite see it, I'm going to say 2010. It doesn't change too fast. If anything, these redder areas are going to start spreading out. Yeah, that's a good point. So, one of the things when we talk about solar, I like to clarify right off the bat, because there's a lot of misunderstanding as far as what is solar energy. Some of you might have had or have seen something called solar hot air panels. And solar hot air panels are basically a box that's sometimes on a roof. I see them, there's a lot of them in Helena, back from the 70s. They're a box on the roof with a clear cover, and the sunlight, the sun's energy, warms up the inside of that box, and it warms up the air, and then a fan blows that hot air into the living room. And I was just working on a 30-year-old system in Whitehall a couple months ago. And the thing was still going, it just needed maintenance. But anyway, that uses the sun's energy to warm air. And then that air is then blown in through the furnace or through separate ductwork. Solar hot water panels, they look a little different. They're kind of like a solar panel, but they're fatter. And they typically have copper pipes in them and a glass surface. So when the sun's energy hits that surface, it warms up that little box, and those black pipes get super hot. What happens when you leave a hose out on the lawn in a sunny day? What happens to the water in there?
Gets hot.
Right, it gets really hot. That's exactly how a solar hot water panel works. So you just channel that hot liquid into the house, and it utilizes, again, the sun's heat. Passive solar homes, another term of solar usage. That basically means the house is oriented to the south, so you have the bulk of your windows on the south side. So our south is here. This room actually has a lot of passive solar energy available to it right here. The sun's energy comes in, it warms surfaces, the table, warms this, warms the walls. Then when the sun sets, it re-radiates that energy into a living space. So it's just designing around those principles. Solar electricity, however, is completely different than all those other technologies. Solar electricity uses the sun's light, or photons. In fact, heat is detrimental to the efficiency of these. The colder it is, the more energy these produce. Anybody know why? The colder it is, the more electricity these solar panels produce. Come on, there's got to be an engineer or two in here.
Where's Dan Battlestein?
Resistance in the conductors?
Exactly. There's less resistance. Heat creates resistance, and electricity can't flow as fast. It has a harder time. So in a cold climate like Montana, in the wintertime, in the dead of winter, our solar electric system is just pumping out tremendous amounts of energy because the air is colder. So that's an advantage for us. So keep in mind when you're thinking about solar, there's different types of solar, and you want to think in your mind, okay, what are we talking about? Solar hot water, solar air, or solar electricity? Incidentally, as I've said, they've all come from the same fuel source, which is the sun. There's a reason now why solar energy is so cheap, as well as wind energy. And it's because those renewable forms of power are free. There's no fuel costs. Never with wind or sun. Think about it. And it's abundant, very, very abundant, especially in Montana. We have a heck of a lot of energy here. We're just starting to tap into it in our state, which is great. But the fuel is free. That's the biggie. And now that the equipment costs have been coming down so much, now we're seeing amazing things happening. So, just in a nutshell, I won't spend too much time getting too technical, but here's how one way that a solar cell is created, okay? It takes a lot of electricity to generate these. These solar wafers are semiconductors. They're essentially made of sand. And very high tech. We have REC factory just outside of Butte, past Rocker. They're manufacturing these wafers. They manufacture, REC makes a really good solar electric panel. They also process this to make silane gas, which is used for televisions and computer screens and things like that as well. So it's a very high-tech component to create a solar wafer. And basically, without going into too much detail, sunlight hits the surface of this, the photons. The photons bust free electrons. We can't see any of this. The electrons go from a positive side to a negative side, and that creates the movement. And on these, solar panels, this panel here, which is a little demo panel, consists of these little wafers laminated onto here. And if you look on top, you can come up after the presentation and check these out, but there's something called traces. And these traces are little tinned or silver circuitry. So the photons hit the panel, they bust free the electrons jump on the circuits, and they're going to travel in the path of least resistance. I call the circuitry freeways and highways, and so those little electrons jump on those freeways and highways, and they all travel in one direction. That movement of electrons is electricity, and it creates a DC current. So in the back of these, we have an outlet, or a junction box, that has a positive and a negative coming out. Oh, some background music. The beauty of a solar electric cell, the photovoltaic effect, is the closest thing we've gotten to mimicking photosynthesis. Does anybody know how efficient, is there a leaf in here? There is a leaf right here, but it's made out of oil. But that was a real tree. Does anybody know how efficient that leaf would be at converting sunlight into energy? What do you think the efficiency of a leaf or a blade of grass?
Nearly
Very
100%.
What's that?
Nearly 100%.
Yeah, about 99.99999% efficient. Granted, there's been about 4 or 5 billion years of evolution, but as humans, we're getting there by increasing the efficiency of this technology, or of the conversion of solar energy into electricity. Any idea where we're at now, at about 50, 60 years in on this technology, efficient-wise?
30?
Oh, I wish.
15.
15, that's good. That's a good guess. We've been at about, hovering around 16% for about 20 years. And then in the last 10 or 15 years, the efficiency's been increasing very, very slowly, up to 18, and a couple companies are pushing 20%. It's a very, very slow process to try to mimic nature in the process of photosynthesis. But it's happening. It is improving. And luckily, worldwide, because this technology is booming, there are so many investors and so many companies working to increase that efficiency even more. But it's a very slow process. That's what I want to say. If you're online and you want to buy solar panels and you say, oh, here's a good deal, solar panels, and you think, well, I'm going to wait a little bit until the efficiency increases. Because remember, if the efficiency increases, the panel can get smaller, but the power output stays the same. So, it'll be great when one day this will be the panel and this will power your house.
Yeah.
We're working towards it. So, anyway, yeah, we're pushing about 20% on the high end, but it's mostly hovering around 18%. Okay, so you have our solar panel here. Again, you've got the solar wafer. It's laminated onto tempered glass. The tempered glass is very strong. It's very difficult for hail to break this. This is all designed through military specs. IEEE inspections. Most solar panels come with a nameplate on the back that has all the specifications on the output of how this is designed and what it can do under all kinds of circumstances. And then the solar panels are then encased in aluminum frame for rigidity. So, believe it or not, the weak side of a solar panel is the back side. This is the strong side. This tempered glass is really, really, really strong. The back, though, if I took a knife and I scraped this rubber covering, I could damage the circuits in the panel. And so that could affect the output. Incidentally, there's lots of solar systems installed in Butte. Anybody aware of that? I think, does anybody know the latest number? We were at 100, but I'm sure we're getting close to 200 systems out there. Anybody have solar on any of their buildings, houses, or business? We've got 1, 2, Agree. Nice, good. And what's nice, like I said, is the prices are coming way down quickly.
I had a question on the panels. Would it be less expensive to use like plexiglass, or is that an option, or why is tempered glass better than oil?
There's been a couple companies that have come out with different types of plastic over the years, and they just have not held up. The extreme conditions that are pounded onto these surfaces, from high heat, super cold, expansion, contraction, they just don't last. It's the same as if you take some other type of plastic and set it outside. I should mention also, standard warranties on solar panels is 25 years.
Wow.
Okay, nothing out there has a warranty that's that long. And part of that is the durability of using the tempered glass for the panels. Yeah.
We have solar panels on our home. We're visiting from Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Okay.
We have them installed in 1983
Right.
just to heat our water.
Okay.
And our electricity bill dropped 50% in a month.
Amazing.
And it has gone on and on. They've never been replaced. They've never been damaged by hail. That's
Right.
one of the biggest fears.
Yeah, it's a good testament.
So it's wonderful.
Yeah, and you got first generation solar technology back then.
Right.
Amazing, yeah, and I run into them. I do consultation work all over the state, site assessments and everything, and I'll still run into these older systems, and it's amazing. They're just still out there doing their thing. The beauty is that, you know, unlike a generator or a power plant that we're so used to, that's fossil fuel based, listen to this panel for a second, see if you can hear this. Listen. Nothing. Not a sound. There's no moving parts, right? The sun just shines on it and it generates electricity. It's that simple. And so that's why these companies know over time that you can have a warranty. That's 20, 25 years. We have older generation solar panels on one of our guest houses, and it is 50 years old now.
Wow.
So it's a remarkable technology. Okay, so looking at the usage of solar electricity, there's three main types that people are using all over the world. And we'll just break them down a little bit so you have a better understanding of how you might use solar electricity. Our presentation, of course, is off-grid. And you can still be connected and living in town and so forth, and still move in that direction of more independence and self-sufficiency. With an off-grid system, you have the solar panels. Oh, I should have brought my extra pointer. It's way up here. And do we have a stick?
We don't.
No. Okay.
Old school.
And then
Turn the light off.
turn that out. And so here's a solar panel. So the electricity is coming in. It goes through a little box called a charge controller, and that regulates how much electricity is going into the batteries. So here's the charge controller, and here's our battery bank storage. I've got some pictures with those in a minute. And then that's storing electricity in DC power. So it's kind of like the same electricity that's in your car. Thank you. Look at this.
I rent this pointer.
Okay, how much
Buy
per
the one.
minute? Oh, by the swipe. 5, 10, 15. Here's our batteries. Energy comes in. DC power, we need to invert this to AC current so it runs your house like you regularly do. So the inverter changes the DC to AC so you can power your house. That's a basic off-grid system, totally self-sufficient. Some people will have a backup gas generator. Everything is automatic. You don't necessarily have to go in there and always be fiddling with everything. Once you program, the technology's been at this state for a long time now, to where once you program everything, then you just let it go. You don't have to turn the sun on and turn the sun off, and turn the batteries on and turn the batteries off. Once it's all set, it just does its thing. Usually the weak link in an off-grid system is this right here. It's the generator. Why? Because any of you who work around gas generators know there's tons of moving parts. Always, there's something always going to break down. Something's going to get clogged. There's filters, there's bearings, the frequency is going to change in the motor. There's all kinds of stuff. So usually, if something fails in an off-grid home, it's going to be the gas generator. I should mention, off-grid comes in a lot of applications. All of you have been using off-grid for decades. Right here. This is a calculator with a little solar panel, like you see up on that picture. 100% off-grid. You've got your battery storage back in here, little button battery. You've got your electronic circuitries that are allowing that electricity to go in, store it, and then you've got the load. When you use the calculator in a home, that would be the equivalent of turning on your dishwasher, or doing laundry, or working in the office. That's using up the electricity. And then the sun charges your battery again. So, as I mentioned before, applications for off-grid, they've been used a long time. Satellites, most of the satellites orbiting the planet. We see these everywhere, right? I remember when these first started. Right. And the Montana Department of Transportation started getting into these. And I was talking to one of the engineers, and they had a problem with their batteries were always dying. This was back 20 years ago. And when I drive around, it drives me nuts, because I'd see these, and these panels wouldn't be facing south. They have to face south to charge the battery. And if you drain that battery, you'll kill that battery. The battery's always been the weakest link. So they upgraded that. They changed now to LED lighting, which is super efficient and good. And then the batteries, they're going more with gel cell, and I think they're moving towards lithium ion. We'll keep an eye on that. And then homes, again, same thing. Solar panel, battery storage. Moving on, grid tie. This is what really changed the world of solar electricity. Here you have the power grid, which most of us have. And the difference being is that we had an inverter breakthrough about 20 years ago, where inverters, these boxes that could change from AC or from DC to AC, became super efficient. They created what's called a true sine wave inverter that creates cleaner electricity than the power grid. When that happened, all of a sudden, somebody could take that electricity from their solar panels and, if the utility allowed, send it back onto the grid safely. And so right now we're at a point where that's done millions and millions of homes all over the world. Most of the solar that is tied in and imbued here is the same thing. They're grid-tied solar electric systems. The power flows in both directions. When you need it in the house, you're using straight from the sun. If you use more than your panels are generating, then you pull it on the grid. And so you get a credit. Northwestern Energy will credit you at this point so far for the same amount that you're paying them. So it's a good deal at this moment. But there's a lot of fight to change that and to not allow you to do that. So we're...
Chris,
Yes.
what happens if the power grid goes down, supply, like Montana Electric?
Right.
Does that affect that system?
Right. So thanks, Pat, for asking that. So on an off-grid system, notice what's missing. There's no battery storage, and there's no gas generator either. So if the power goes down from ice or car accident or whatever, this cuts off, and now all of a sudden, your circuit breakers in your inverter are going to turn off. So when the power goes off, you don't have backup electricity, even though you have solar. And that's mandatory right now. There has to be this automatic disconnect for safety reasons. Because if you had a battery bank or a gas generator and the power's off and a lineman's out here working on the line, your house is sending electricity back on the line could kill them. So there's a reason why there's a safety mechanism in the inverters. However, keep in mind, with straight grid intertie, you don't have backup. It's only when you have grid that you can use your solar. A couple different pictures. These are the inverters changing from AC to DC. They're not real big, pretty small. 2,000 watt system there. There's about 1,500 watt system. Most people now are putting in 3,000 to 4,000 watts of solar. Back then, this is all you could afford. So expensive. We'll talk about cost in a minute. Here's where things are moving now. It's really fascinating. This is on grid with the battery storage. So now all of a sudden, everything's the same, solar panels, grid intertie, but now you have a battery bank that can store your excess energy. So if something happens to the power line, this goes off, this automatically triggers your battery storage and you have your backup. In fact, most people who have that don't even know that the power's off because the switch is so fast and it's safe. The reason why this is picking up the speed right now is because battery technology is advancing so fast. And this is something, batteries right now are where solar electricity was about 20 years ago. A lot of interest in it, prices were still high, but then all of a sudden the prices are starting to plunge for battery storage. And finally, the third type, AC coupling, well I just talked about that with battery backup. They call them different things, AC coupling, uninterruptible power supplies. But I wanted to just touch on batteries for a moment, one slide here. Most of us are used to a standard lead acid battery, just like in your car. To me, these are really antiquated, but they've been functional for decades. We did have an advancement a few years ago. Everybody started moving towards AGM or gel cells. These were sealed batteries that didn't need any maintenance or anything. And it was nice. You didn't have to check the electrolyte. You didn't have to worry about outgassing and venting your battery-based system. It was all self-contained, could be indoors easily. The big shift taking place right now around the world is with lithium ion. And I'm sure you've heard about it. Usually the media covers lithium ion when one catches on fire in Tesla's car. But if you read the details, there's always more to that story. You all have been using lithium ion for decades. Right here, this is it. It's a very small battery, but it's in here. And they work, they charge pretty fast. They last a long time. And so as the prices have come down, as technologies develop, they start to expand the technology to grow them. Most of your hybrid cars out there, if anybody drive a hybrid car, if you've driven one, you're using a lithium ion battery. Everybody who hasn't used them is shifting towards lithium ion. What's new in the solar energy field in the home market is now they're starting to be affordable. So, and just to let you know, last year at Sage Mountain Center, we switched over to lithium ion. We bit the bullet. It's still a little expensive now. And a little expensive, I'm talking $7,000 to power our whole place. But keep in mind, we're a demonstration center, and so we're trying to promote the latest technologies. Once we switch these batteries, I will never go back to a lead acid battery again. Never. These are so efficient, they charge so fast, there's no outgassing, they're very light. It's weird, you're used to a battery that just weighs so much. Like lithium ion is just so light, you're like, is anything in here? But it's an incredible technology. And after living with it for a year, now I know why all the car dealers around the world are promoting their electric fleets using this technology. It's proven itself for sure. And a few more examples of off-grid. You know, you can be off-grid here, right? Anybody have an RV or trailer? You throw a solar panel on it, that's the same idea. It's off-grid. You can plug into landline if you want to. This one's got a little, I know it's a little wind generator. You do not want to drive with that thing like that. No. Because some people think, oh, you'll charge it, it'll come back in because you're driving and keep it going. Like, petrol motion machine. But no, after 30 miles an hour, this thing's going to blow apart. Yeah. Touching on cost real quick, we're wrapping up the talk here. Solar electricity now costs the same or less than coal and natural gas in 27 states. This is major, major stuff. Because once it gets cheaper, that everybody naturally is going to go towards that. Corporations. Only one thing surprises me more than the drop in solar prices, and that is the legalization of pot. I never saw that coming. I could never imagine that. Right? Throw a few numbers out there real quick for you. Solar panel prices have dropped 70% since 2011.
Wow.
Solar electricity installed systems right now in Montana run about $3.25 a watt. So if you want to price them online or whatever, kind of get bids and stuff, that's a good ballpark you can use. That's about an average. I work with most of the installers in Montana when I do my site assessments, so I review lots of bids. And so these are the numbers that I see coming back from the installers around the state. You add batteries to that, that adds about another $2 per watt. And again, keep in mind, most people who are installing batteries are doing grid intertie. They're connected to the power lines. So it's a new thing for people to bring in batteries. If you're off-grid, it's a must. You have to have batteries. There's no way around it. And just to throw out these numbers, again, I won't spend too much time on it. But typical system installed, 3,000 watt solar panels at $5.25 a watt. That includes the batteries. Looking at $15,000, price of a cheap car. Montana has a $1,000 state tax credit, $500 per person, and a 30% federal tax credit right now. That really helps bring the price down. So you're looking at a 3,000 watt system with batteries can run you in the end about 10 grand. Keep in mind, those solar panels are going to last you about 25 years. Inverters typically have 10 to 15 year warranties. Battery replacement will probably come in about 10 to 15 years. So, factoring in those, but we're not looking at a lot of money, especially if you think how much we spend on a car. When I see a $50,000 truck, I'm just like scratching my head. I think, wow, that could be 5 houses being powered.
So Chris, 3,000 watts, about what size house would that?
What size house would that be? That is, we don't go by square footage, but if you look at the typical usage of a standard home in Montana, 750 kilowatt hours per month. That's an average.
And
but
we
again,
can find that on our bill, how much,
it's all
how
on your
many
power
kilowatts
bills. Yeah,
we're
just look on your
using, so we
power
could
bill.
figure out if we could get by with
Absolutely.
less.
Yeah, and there's a lot more variables though than just looking at your power bill, because if all of a sudden you become your own power plant and want to generate your own electricity, all of a sudden you're going to become really super hyper aware of every single watt that you're using in your house, because you just don't want to fire on your electric heater and break out your welder and then, it's going to be great. No, your system can't handle that. So you need to be very conscious of, maybe not a 52-inch screen. Maybe I can get by with a 48-inch television screen.
Chris, as you know, we're off the grid, but I had to change my way of looking at electricity when we moved here.
Right.
I gave up many things. I gave up coffee grinders. I now do it this way.
Yeah.
I mean, we're still very simple, but you have to watch what lights are on and how
Yeah.
much power you actually use. You've got to be very
Exactly.
conservative. But it's livable. It's livable. You just have to manage at a less
Exactly. It's just being your own plant manager.
really.
And that's partly why, we are connected to the grid, because all this stuff goes on behind the scenes, and when you pay your power bill, you're contributing to that, and that makes sense. Yeah.
What's the return then, after your $15,000 or your $10,000 investment? What would you say is customer?
Return on investment is a little tricky because there's so many variables. But the numbers we keep seeing from somebody who's on grid, going off grid, and just cutting the tile together, you might be looking at 10 to 12 years. Yes.
As you well know, when you helped us install our panels, we have used panels that we purchased originally. That was back in '92, and they're still functioning.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, panels are extremely durable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does a month of rain do to your ability to use solar?
So if you have, your solar panels will still generate electricity in overcast weather,
Right.
just not
It's
as
just
much.
light, yeah.
Usually when you size for a battery bank, you don't just have enough storage in your batteries for one day. Because if you have a cloudy day, dark day, then your batteries are drained. So the standard design feature is at least 3 days of autonomy. That's what we call it. So you factor in, it's just crunching numbers. You try to design 3 days of battery storage because you're always going to have some kind of energy coming in within that period. We run an education and retreat center, so I mean, they don't have to think about it, but I'm always on my mind thinking, okay, 10 people, that's 10 showers a day, right? All this water pumping and water usage and stuff. What's the weather doing? Do we have a lot of wind coming in? Do we have a lot of sun? So I'm kind of always aware of that bigger picture. But as someone who's living off grid on their own, it's just natural. You're going to be watching the sun and the weather. I mean, it just connects you right with it. Maybe there might be a day where you're like, okay, we've had a week of snow.